This is Bloomberg Businessweek with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
We've been talking about Charlie Munger, and as Noah Buhire in his story on Charlie talks about how Munger made a lot of different donations. He promoted abortion rights, education. He served as chairman of the Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles. Multi-million-dollar bequest to the University of Michigan and University of California at Santa Barbara. We talked about the housing facility that he proposed, but he was very philanthropic, Tim.
He was philanthropic, and he was also, I think many people would argue, quite the leader. And that's what we're talking about with our next guest, is leading the way here. She's the founder and CEO of a consulting firm that's worked with the likes of Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, the SEC, the U.S. Army, U.S. Marine Corps, Booz Allen Hamilton, and more, including Harvard and Howard universities. The company's name, Kusi, is an acronym for knowledge, understanding, strategy, and implementation. And in the company's own words, is, quote, committed to transforming, inspiring, and cultivating leaders around the world.
So let's get to it. Her new book is The Power of Conscious Connection, 4 Habits to Transform How You Live and Lead. We have with us Talia Fox. She's Chief Executive Officer of the consultancy Kusi Global and a fellow at Harvard University. Talia, nice to have you here with us. You know, we're talking about Charlie Munger, quite a leader, and someone who also kind of seemed to live to the fullest and was very honest and transparent about his views. Tell us a little bit about how you are thinking about how people can transform how they live and lead.
Yeah, you know, it's amazing. With his death, he almost reached 100 years old. Mm-hmm. And what you're describing about all of the giving that he did with his time here, that is what conscious connection is about. It's about being conscious of what's happening in the world and the needs, and being connected to the power that you have to change it. And that power can look different for many different people.
So I want to think about your own journey as a leader, because you started this consultancy quite a few years ago, and you work with companies to help cultivate leaders. And it's not just companies that you work with, but you also offer these online learning modules. Can you talk a little bit about your own journey as a leader? Because when I speak to people who do this type of work, I always want to get an understanding of, okay, well, how do they develop themselves into somebody who can actually teach these skills?
Yeah, so my background is in psychology. So I really I started off in nonprofits, studying the impact that leadership has on real lives. And I started doing keynote speaking events for nonprofit organizations. But I was very connected to the fact that leadership decisions impact. I was able to look into children's eyes and see the impact of leadership decisions. I've had quite an interesting journey of being a single mom, of having to really find my way and study what matters and what makes a difference in achievement. And so I've read literally hundreds of books, and I have been on a hunt for my entire 20-year career, 20 plus years, finding out what are those core ideas, what are those core things that really make a difference in how we live and lead. And that is really what this book is about. I'm sharing those stories, the stories of achievement, and the hack that I call it to a great leadership and a great life.
So let's get to the 4 habits. So talk to us, walk us through them, if you will.
So it's very interesting because the 4 habits make up the acronym LOVE, but that absolutely was a beautiful coincidence. So the 4 habits are listening, observe, value, and engage. And each of these habits is connected to a leadership skill that we want to master. So listening is connected to emotional intelligence that's very critical for our success. And so I outline in the book how to do that. Observation is connected to systems thinking, this opportunity to see patterns and to understand how interdependent we are. Values is connected to cultural competence, our capacity to value people, to value connection, to value differences, to really be able to see all the big issues happening in the world and understand how to adapt our worldviews to those. And then lastly, engage. The real critical key value, particularly in the world we are in today, is to be able to communicate in such a way that connects instead of divides. And so that habit makes up the acronym LOVE, which I don't know, my Department of Defense folks, I don't know how they feel about that acronym. I was actually cringing at how fluffy it was, but when I saw it right there, I said, oh, it makes up love. I wasn't going to shy away from it. And so we're sticking to it. So we'll see if leaders can handle the experience of that being so conscious connected in their strategy.
It's so funny because you do work with clients like the Department of Defense, the U.S. Army, the U.S. Marine Corps. What's the reaction to the folks when you share with them this methodology?
Well, our firm, Kusi, Kusi, knowledge, as you shared, understanding, strategy, implementation, that has been the strategic approach that we use when we go and do culture transformation projects. So this book I wrote not only for my clients, but also for it's for the people. And so it's really about, on an individual level and on a leadership level, what are those habits that we need to master on a regular basis, on a daily basis, to impact change.
Talia, we talk with leaders all the time, and I'm curious about when you're working with the defense contractors, do a lot of government work, it looks like, consultants, university. I mean, what is it that people often come to you and say, okay, we've got this situation, here's what's wrong, or here's what's wrong with our leadership, like, help us, or do they not even know?
What's interesting is that, I really wish that people would be more pulled by purpose as opposed to pushed by stress. But typically when people do come to Kusi, there's something happening in the news. There's, racial issues, social issues, political issues, and you're seeing a huge divide or even bleeding out executives. You're seeing problems, serious problems. We actually call it a culture shot. They need to be triaged, if you will, to get the culture back on board. You've got a lot of conflict. People aren't talking to each other. That's when people say, okay, who do you go to? You go to Kusi for those kinds of challenges. And we really come in with sort of skills and systems to support in a full-scale culture transformation.
So what are the issues right now that the companies that are coming to you right now are telling you that they're facing?
So right now, we're dealing, of course, with a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, particularly around conversations about politics, conversations that are really highly tense. And so there is this opportunity. I mean, in the government, they have an act and a law that you're not supposed to talk about these things, but people know, there's social media. And so one of the things that we're doing is, how do you have these difficult conversations? How do you stay authentic without having to get into the weeds of what's actually happening in the world? So how do you build those relationships in a way that feels professional, but that also feels authentic?
Well, I'm curious.
Yeah.
I'm glad you went there, because it's fascinating. We have conversations, and I feel like they certainly picked up momentum when it comes to diversity and inclusion, coming off of the pandemic, coming off of George Floyd. It's amazing how here we are, how many years out from that, how many years before that we were having those conversations, and yet we still have a problem. I don't know. You talk with leaders, you work with companies. What is the fix so that we don't have to have the conversation anymore, because it just is?
I don't think that it's a fix. I think it's actually almost like hygiene, cultural hygiene.
I love that.
You have new people coming into an organization. This is something where we're people. We have feelings, we have triggers, we have experiences, we have life. And so we really need to treat it as a constant opportunity to create space, to be able to build this environment where people are committed to innovation, committed to growth, committed to being their best selves. But in order to do that, the soil has to be, we have some very specific communication strategies and ways that this culture operates. And we need to make sure that everyone is on the same page. I kind of like to use the very plain language of, in this house, this is how we behave. In this house, this is how we talk to each other. And that's the corporate speak. This is what we do here together. And this is how we have these kinds of conversations and connect and deal with each other.
Corporate hygiene, is that what you said?
Yes, I
like that. I like that, right? It just is. Like, you do it because you have to, you should be.
Got to brush your teeth.
You got to brush your teeth.
Exactly. And using that analogy, the more you keep brushing your teeth, you have less cavities, less crisis. You don't want to be going on a wonderful trip somewhere and you have to go get a root canal. But that's what organizations are dealing with right now. I will tell you, if I was leading in any large organization, I would not lead a team that has not been trained on how to manage and communicate. I think in this day and age, it's almost like not having a website or people not being able to use a computer.
It's a great way. But it's a great way of thinking about it. It's a different mindset, and I think that's really important in terms of changing ultimately the outcome. Talia Fox, thank you so much. Chief Executive Officer, the consultancy, Kusi Global, a fellow at Harvard, and of course her book is The Power of Conscious Connections, 4 Habits to Transform How You Live and Lead. Tim and I mentioned earlier, Charlie's been talking, of course, about the passing of Charlie Munger, who, along with Warren Buffett, really built Berkshire into the behemoth it is today. But we also have talked about how Charlie Munger was also very philanthropic and took positions on different rights, whether it was abortion rights, which he promoted. He talked about education, served as chairman of the Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles, but he also gave multi-million-dollar gifts to various universities. So education was certainly front and center, which is something we just kind of think about, Tim, more broadly, if you will, on this Giving Tuesday.
Yeah, Giving Tuesday is that decade-old grassroots movement, and it encourages people to give to charities on the Tuesday following Thanksgiving. Carol, maybe you've gotten some emails today from charitable organizations or nonprofits that are trying to, I won't want to say take advantage, but really lean into this day as one where people give away a lot of money.
Well, and I think about as we all get ready to spend money on gifts and so on and so forth, to think about giving back to society more largely and more broadly. Our next guest has a study on giving trends of affluent households and has found that charitable giving among this set is now above pre-pandemic levels. Dianne Chipps Bailey is National Philanthropic Executive at Bank of America Private Bank. She is with us on Zoom from Charlotte, North Carolina. Dianne, nice to have you here with Tim and myself. And thinking about this story and thinking about Charlie Munger specifically, tell us a little bit about the demographics among affluent households. Who gives the most? Give us an idea of just kind of that background, if you will.
Absolutely, Carol. And thank you to Tim as well for having me today. I'm thrilled to share more about the Bank of America study of philanthropy. But before I do that, I think providing a little bit of context into why this research into affluent Americans, wealthy Americans, is so important. If you look at donor participation stretching back to before the Great Recession, back in the 06, 07 era, we saw 2/3 of Americans overall, the general population, making contributions to charitable organizations every year. Now that general participation number is down less than 50%. So really a substantial decline. That's why days like Giving Tuesday are so important.
Wait, I want to make sure, Dianne, I get that number right. You're saying post-financial crisis, we saw charitable giving reach a certain level, and now since then it's down a little less than 50%?
So it's the overall participation in giving is less than 50%. It's around 49%. And that's gone down from 2/3 before the Great Recession.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for the clarification.
But when you look at giving from wealthy Americans, we see that 85%, compared to the 49% in the general population, are supporting charitable organizations year over year. So when you think about people like Charlie Unger, you know that it's those donors that are really carrying the day. Nonprofits increasingly relying on a smaller and much more affluent circle of supporters.
Why is it down, though?
There are lots of reasons. The first, of course, is the pressure of income and wealth inequality. We're seeing other reasons that matter as well. The first is trust. When we look at trust in societal institutions among affluent Americans, our research tells us that 21% of affluent Americans have a great deal of trust in nonprofits to be able to meet the challenges of the day. That 21% is the highest percentage. If you look at trust in Congress for example, only 4% of the affluent Americans that we studied said they had a great deal of confidence in Congress to solve our issues. So, but that represents a decline in trust overall. Another reason that we think that giving is declining that's really so interesting are changing patterns of religion. In our research, we know that religion continues to get the biggest piece of the pie from affluent Americans when it comes to prioritizing their giving. The most giving goes to religion, but it's coming from a smaller group of donors.
Yeah.
Participation in giving has declined substantially, but those who are giving with urgency and with enthusiasm enthusiasm, with medium gifts that are 6 times higher than the next category, which is basic needs. But so many people learn patterns of benevolence and practices of benevolence in worshiping communities. And so when we see declines in participation there, you saw the Pew Research, right, which says that now 30% of Americans classify themselves as nuns. N-O-N-E-S.
Okay, I was confused for a second.
Clarify, nuns, N-O-N-E-S. And so that's atheist, agnostic, and spiritual, but not religious. So, when you see those increasing rates of people who do not identify with worship communities, do we lose those patterns and traditions of charity?
How does something like war, geopolitics, climate change, how do these things impact the giving world?
So let's use global unrest and war as a for example. So we do see surges in giving when it is being responsive to headlines, right? That urgency of what we're seeing in Israel and Palestine with humanitarian need, et cetera. That does inspire a surge in participation in giving and in generous giving for the time period of the news cycle. So Tim and Carol, I'm here to tell you that the work that you're doing is incredibly important.
Thank you.
To focusing individuals where that generosity is needed most. Because we do see a bit of retraction when the media moves on to different news stories. However, the uncertainty that also comes from geopolitical conflict and unrest does also have an overall chilling effect as it relates to giving, as do challenges in the economy. So if you look at 2022, which is the period in which we studied, that covers our research, remember, I don't have to tell you, market volatility and decline, interest rates, inflation, even among affluent Americans, those uncertainties in the economy, in geopolitics, that does cause a bit of a retraction and a little more caution in giving.
We often see that, right, when there's little nervousness, and certainly in terms of the outlook. And we are at a time if we're trying to figure out kind of what happens next. Dianne, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Happy holidays. Dianne Chipps Bailey, National Philanthropic Executive at Bank of America Private Bank, on Zoom from Charlotte, North Carolina, on this Giving Tuesday.
I'm thinking about
you crinkled
because I haven't given to my organizations yet. Sometimes you get before the end of the year.
I know, the end of the year. It's when everybody's like,
exactly,
get it done. Stick around, everybody. This is Bloomberg.